Okay, welcome to the second session of our COVID-19 Isolation and Young People's Power to Fight conference. My name is Ben Lindsay. I am CEO of Power to Fight. We empower communities to end youth violence. And this is the second session. The first session we did was legal ramifications of COVID-19 for young people. And that was delivered by Augusta from Just for Kids Law, and that is now on our YouTube site. If you just search Power to Fight on YouTube, you can rewatch that or you watch it for the first time if you didn't see it. Today is the first of 3 sessions, you lucky people. We've got Laura, who's going to be, in a moment, I'll let her introduce herself, but we're going to be looking at how to engage with young people virtually. And then you get Laura again with 2 other people, Ebenita and Talia, who are going to be talking about gender, young people and COVID-19. And then after that, we've got partnership work during COVID with, I'm going to host a conversation with Andre Harriott from Humanity Group, Derek Bardwell and Lib Peck, who is the director of the London Violence Reduction Unit. So just a few housekeeping, and that just gives you what we're about. Just a couple of housekeeping. Laura will talk for maybe around 40 minutes, 45 minutes, and then we'll have a bit of Q&A. The idea is that we just want an hour-long session so we can just kind of get into it very quickly. And yeah, hopefully you'll find it really helpful. If you have any questions, I'll be monitoring the questions. Just please put them in the Q&A. For Laura, and then we'll probably, unless she wants to ask them along the way, we'll probably more likely take them at the end. And yeah, just have to say, anybody gets abusive or anything like that, I will just kick you out. But I trust everybody here is professional. We have got 73 people at the moment, which is fantastic. So I'm going to hand over to Laura. She will introduce herself. I'll just say that Laura is somebody I've known for almost 10 years, maybe over 10 years, I lose count. Fantastic woman who does incredible work around young people, specifically around young women. And she's great and is one of our frequent trainers for Power to Fight. And for those who don't know what Power to Fight is about, we, as I said, empower communities to end youth violence, and we do that through a number of ways. And workshops like this is one of them, as well as developing culturally competent therapeutic services, online resources like our Power Talks, and connecting people who wouldn't normally sit next to each other to discuss this issue. We are a charity, so while this is free for you, and it's actually, we've got funding from the City Bridge Trust, but we are a charity, so if you do feel like you would like to donate to us, we will be very welcome. But without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Laura, who will take you through the session, and I'll unmute Laura, or she can unmute herself. And we'll crack on. Over to you, Laura.
Great, thanks, Ben. Hi, everyone. It's really good to be leading this session with you all. I was thinking about it while I was preparing it, and just thinking about how nice it is to have the space to kind of reflect on what we've all actually been doing for the last 3 months. And so I know that many of you will have been engaging virtually for the last 3 months during lockdown, but I think it was we all had to adjust very quickly. So I think now to come to this and reflect a little bit on what different organisations have been doing, what's worked in terms of engaging virtually, and we're also hopefully going to spend a little bit of time at the end just thinking about what the new normal might look like for us as youth organisations, as people working with young people, and I know there might be some parents on here as well. So as Ben said, my name is Laura Price, and I work for an organisation called Abianda in Islington, and we work with young women who are affected by gangs, serious youth violence and county lines. So if I fall into my habit of using young women rather than young people, please forgive me for that, because that is my default, but I have kind of created this presentation thinking about young people in general. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. So just give me a second. Okay. All right, brilliant. So we're going to be talking about engaging young people virtually. As Ben said, I'm going to talk to you for the first 40 minutes or so, there might be some opportunities for you to put comments in the chat. I'm more than happy for you to do that. The limitations of my laptop mean that I probably won't be able to see that. So Ben, if people are making comments that you think it would be good to share, then please interrupt me. That's totally fine. So I wanted to start off by thinking about young people's experiences of lockdown, because I think when we are talking about engaging young people virtually, we have to be really mindful about what they are actually going through at the moment. And in some respects, it's quite similar to what we're all going through. I think everyone's had different stages of lockdown, of feeling maybe good about having some time to work from home, to not be running around all the time. And then there's also been times where it's been really difficult. And for some people, it will be more on the difficult end, more of the time. And for other people, it will be a little bit easier to manage and balance. The picture on this screen was actually drawn by a young person from Islington. So I'm co-located within the council youth support team, and they were kind enough to share this picture with me that one of their youth counsellors drew, reflecting on their time in lockdown and what it had been like for them. And I wanted to share it because I think it's a really, really powerful representation of what this time has been like for many people. And so when we're starting this conversation about young people's experiences and then how we engage them virtually, I think this is a good place for us to start, and a good place for us to be thinking, you know, what has it been like for young people? This might be a good time for people to put in the chat if you would like to, if you've got any comments about what your experiences have been, what young people have been telling you about what lockdown has been like for them. If you want to do that, that would be great. And then if you maybe feed that in after the next slide to give people a little chance to put those in. So I'm actually going to start with engaging and resourcing young people for when we're not present, when we're not actually there in their lives, because I think based on the picture that we've just seen and the last slide, some of the most difficult times for young people will probably be when we don't have contact with them and when they're not actually engaging with us. And so what I've been really aware of in lockdown is that we need to be supporting young people to kind of build resilience, to draw on their own resources when we're not actually there, when we're not present. And at that time, and what we provide for them, whether that's virtually or physically, what we provide for them at that time is just as important as what we do kind of live virtually online. So I wanted to start here and just really pick up on the fact that young people have amazing innate resources. This is really core and fundamental to the way that we work at Abianda and the approach that we take, the values that we have. Young people are amazingly resourceful, and I'm sure that all of you can think of examples of seeing that since we've been in lockdown. And so what I was really trying to do in my practice at the beginning of lockdown was to help the young women that I work with recognize what strengths, skills and resources they already had that might be useful for them in this time of lockdown. We use an approach called solution-focused techniques when we're working with young people, and so the questions on the third bullet point are taken from that kind of approach and can be really helpful in identifying strengths-based and kind of solution-focused resources that young people can draw on. So things like, what strengths, skills and resources were you using before lockdown? Like, what are your key strengths and your key skills, and how do you think they might benefit you during lockdown? Or now that we've been in lockdown for over 3 months, or around 3 months, I think, you might want to reflect on that with young people. You might want to say, okay, well, what skills and resources have you used in this time? How have you managed to get through this time and to kind of keep going when things have been really difficult? And then you can move on to questions like, what does it say about you that you have these skills? And what does it say about who you are as a person? So you're really building up their character. And where did you learn that? Where did you learn about those skills? Where did you get those things from? So they can be helpful questions to help young people realize that even when things are really, really difficult, they've got things going for them, and they've got some amazing skills and resources within themselves without us actually doing very much except drawing those things out for them. In practice, what this looked like for me at the beginning of lockdown, it was really important to safety plan with the young women I work with. A lot of them struggle with mental health, and so one of my key concerns at the beginning of lockdown was how they were going to manage in kind of in isolation, really, and sometimes in home environments that weren't very safe and didn't have a very good impact on their mental health. I'm going to come back to that in just a minute because the next slide has got an example of that. Creative activities and resources, some of those we've actually sent physically in the post or dropped them around to young people if that has been needed. And so while virtual kind of engagement is really important, and that's going to be the focus of what we're talking about today, I think also sometimes having those physical resources can be really useful as well. And actually those can quite often work together really well as well. So what we've been doing is, for the young people who have been engaging with us virtually and have been doing one-to-one sessions with us, we've been sending out the resources they'll need for those sessions in the post beforehand, so that they've got something physical to be doing kind of with their hands while they're also talking to us online, which I think really helps with engagement, helps with focus, and helps them to just be present in that conversation when it can be quite difficult to do that when it's just on a screen or over a phone. Links to other organisations and online spaces where they can get support. So I think this is really, really key when we're thinking about actually what are their lives like when we're not there, when we're not engaging with them. So who else can you link them to? What other organisations are doing great things online at the moment? I think normally when we talk about this stuff, it's the go-to is like helplines, Childline, domestic abuse, and the National Domestic Abuse Helpline, things like that. Whereas actually what's happened, because people have been forced to put their services online, there is so much more that young people can access, and they can explore that for themselves, they can do that for themselves, but sometimes they might need a little bit of support to do that as well. An example of this is that I actually had a Zoom call with a young woman on Monday, and I was able to bring in another youth worker into that call so that the young woman could meet her, and then the hope is that the young woman will then have a bit of confidence. She'll have a familiar face that she knows, a familiar voice, and she can then join the youth club's online sessions, and she's really interested in music production, so that's the thing that she wants to focus on. That youth club is actually nowhere near, well, not very near where she lives. She probably wouldn't normally travel to go to it, but because they're offering services online at the moment, it actually means that she's been able to engage in something new. She's been able to expand her support network through this time, which I think is really positive. And then the final point I just want to make in terms of supporting young people when we're not actually present is meeting basic needs. And I'm sure we're all really aware of the need for food, the increased demand on food banks that has been seen, basics like, you know, having money for electricity and gas. And also, we'll talk about this a little bit more as we get into the virtual stuff as well, but access to being online. Not every young person has access to online spaces, has devices, or has consistent Wi-Fi connections. So finding out what those basic needs are and meeting those first was something that was really important for us right at the beginning of lockdown. Ben, have we got any comments that people that you'd like to share from that first picture? I'll go back to it for a second, about young people's experiences.
Yeah. So someone in the chat has basically said, in my experience, young people are experiencing boredom, frustration, disengagement through mundane routines.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you very much. Thanks, guys. That's yeah, that's really helpful. And I think, again, it's looking to those creative activities and resources and linking to other organisations so that we're not feeling the pressure of that all on our shoulders. You know, we are, each of you is one person working with young people, and we can't provide everything for them at this time, but there are lots of other resources out there. So I think as much as possible trying to signpost them to those things and facilitate their engagement with that. You know, you can send them a link to something, but they're not necessarily going to engage with that themselves unless you do try and create those kind of joint Zoom calls so that they can get to know someone else who's going to be in that space, or maybe set up an account with them, if it's, you know, something like Couth online counselling, setting up the account, showing them how to use it. I think sometimes we have to be quite proactive in that to support that engagement that might help with things around boredom. Okay, so I spoke briefly about safety planning. So this is something that I did with some of my young women right at the beginning of lockdown. And it's sort of an amalgamation of various different activities that I would normally do with young women, but adapted slightly for lockdown. So when we're safety planning normally, I guess there's two main types of safety planning that we would use. Domestic abuse safety plans are kind of very common within the violence against women and girls sector. And then also you have safety plans that are maybe more contextual and looking at specific areas of risk. What I was aware of when we went into lockdown was that actually young people's contexts were about to change massively. And for those who were mainly going outside of the family home and where risk was outside of the family home, some of them would be spending a lot more time at home, and that might be a place of increased risk. And at the same time, actually, no matter how much the government told them, there was always going to be young people who were not going to stay in their homes for safety reasons, but also for reasons, as people have said, around boredom and just being in a confined space. So there's a few different aspects to the safety plan. I've called it a self-care plan for the young women that I've worked with, specifically because a lot of my concerns for them was around mental health, but this is pretty adaptable really. And so it really focuses on safety in the home and safety out of the home. When we're doing these sort of exercises, we actually start with another step that you can't see on this page, but we'll start by talking about what is safety and what is risk, because I think it's important for us as professionals to recognise that our definitions of those things might not be the same as young people's, and we need to be aware of their definitions and be working with their definitions, even if we don't quite agree with them, because actually that's how they're going to be approaching the real life situations that they come into contact with. So I will just briefly take you through this. The little bodies that you've got at the top are helping young people to explore what does it feel like for them when they're feeling safe, and what does it feel like for them when they're feeling unsafe. Now, it is a good idea to do a bit of a trigger warning around this exercise to be aware that actually feeling some unsafe and thinking about feeling unsafe for some young people might be quite triggering. So you can phrase this so that it's either about them specifically, depending on the work that you've done with them before and the relationship that you've got with them, or you can phrase it more generally. So you can say, what do you think, what do people in general, or what do young people in general notice is happening in their bodies when they're feeling safe, and what is happening when they're feeling unsafe. So it's a very visceral, kind of physical, getting them to connect with their gut feelings about actually how will I know when I'm on my own in lockdown, when I'm feeling safe, and how will I know when I'm feeling unsafe. And then that supports the rest of the safety plan, because then they're able to recognise those feelings and put the other aspects of the plan into place and act on those feelings, rather than not being aware of them in the first place. So then some of the questions that I asked them was just to identify the safe places at home, and also if they are out in the community, what safe places do they interact with, where could they go. Obviously some of these places have been closed during lockdown, but quite often local shops have still been open, and so there might be one that they go regularly to with their family to. And they might know the owner. That might be a place of safety that has been identified. And yeah, so there's some examples here. This is one that one of my young women completed. So we talked through these different safe places that she would find. You can also do this in a mapping context. So if you want more of a visual aid, I guess, the Contextual Safeguarding Network have some really good resources on contextual safety mapping, and you can access those there. So you might actually do a plan of their home. If the risk that you're concerned about is specifically within their home, you could get them to draw out a map of their home, identify what places are safe, what resources do they have in that place, how would they exit if they needed to. But it's a very visual map to support them with that. And then the other thing that was really important for me when doing this with young women was to get them thinking about safety, both physically and also emotionally. So not just thinking about it in the physical sense, but also getting them to explore what does it mean to be safe emotionally, and what does it mean to be unsafe emotionally, and picking up on those themes around mental health, and again breaking that down into at home and also out and about, and then, as we've already spoken about at the bottom, just people, organisations, different places that young person can go to for support. And you might want to put phone numbers on there, or websites and things like that as well. So we will now get on to the main topic of the session, but hopefully those kind of introduction pieces have been useful, which is engaging young people virtually. And as I said, lots of you will have been doing this already, so I just want to pull on some examples, some really good examples that I've seen. The first thing I want to highlight is just safeguarding, and the fact that this will look different in everyone's context. The link on the screen is to a page that London Youth have put together on, which is an online guide for safeguarding people during COVID-19, and it's got lots of great advice for organisations who are moving things online, maybe for the first time, who haven't had to think about safeguarding in that context before. What we did right at the beginning, the very first thing we did when we went into lockdown, was to call all of our young people and do a risk assessment with them, to find out what they wanted from us during lockdown, and also what kind of support was going to be safe for them. And from that, a really big thing that came up for us was, because we're working with very kind of young women who are considered to be very high risk and vulnerable often, and that risk is often inside and outside of their home, that for them the only safe and remotely confidential space in their homes was going to be their bedroom. And so as an organisation, for us, it didn't feel very safe. It didn't feel like good practice for us to be doing video calls from a excuse me it didn't seem like best practice to be doing video calls from a one-to-one practitioner to a young woman in her bedroom. So we decided to stick to voice calls. Obviously, there's limitations in that as well. And so we've had to work with the additional barriers that come from not actually being able to see a young person's face. But I know that other organisations who have maybe whose services are less confidential, they're not speaking about such sensitive topics, and maybe they're more involved in the family support more widely, and parents are more involved as well. That's been a safe environment in which to set up Zoom calls. There might be 2 practitioners on the call. There might be an agreement with parents that those will actually take place in kind of communal areas in the home rather than in bedrooms. So it's just thinking about all of those different aspects of safeguarding, and what's going to work for that young person, and what could actually potentially create more risk for them or more anxiety for them at this time. And then going into some of the more practical things that we can think about. So I think mixing it up is really important. As someone said, boredom is something that a lot of young people are struggling with, just the mundane repetition of days, and I think we're all experiencing that to some extent. Like, most days are pretty much the same at the moment. So trying to mix up the type of engagement that you are offering to them, doing different things, different forms of contact, sending things in the post, doing an online call, maybe sending an email or a voice note. What works for one young person won't work for another. I'm sure you're all well aware of that. But one thing that I've had to do is just experiment with just different forms of communication. So one young woman, I normally text and call, and we got into lockdown and neither of those things were working very well. I emailed her a couple of times because she said that might be good, because she had to go onto her emails for college. That didn't really work either. And then I started sending her voice notes on WhatsApp, and lo and behold, that was the thing that she responded to. And now she responds consistently when I send her voice notes, and that's the best way for her to communicate. So it's really about thinking a little bit outside the box, thinking a bit creatively, and just trying different things and finding out what works for different young people. As I've already mentioned before, access to technology we have found has been one of the biggest barriers to engagement in lockdown, because for some young people, they don't have consistent Wi-Fi, they might not have Wi-Fi at all at home. Some young people don't have phones or don't have the type of phones that are needed for video calls and things like that. And some of my young women in particular are not allowed phones by their parents for various reasons, but because of those reasons that the parents have instilled, it's meant that actually engagement has been really, really difficult in lockdown. So one of the things that we've been trying to do to overcome that is seeing if we can redirect funds. So where we would normally be spending some of our budgets and our funding on kind of refreshments when we're meeting young people in coffee shops and on travel to and from sessions, we're not using that money for those purposes at the moment. So we've been looking to see if we can redirect some of those funds, working with commissioners and with funders to make sure that young people have the resources that they need to engage during this time. I know that some funders will be more flexible than others, and different organisations and people in different contexts that might be possible, but for others it might not be. But there are kind of charities out there, and I've heard of smaller pots of money that have now been set aside specifically for the purpose of making sure young people can engage virtually. I think sometimes they can take a little bit longer to come through than we would like, but people are thinking about that and are trying to provide resources there where possible. So one-to-one conversations online, I've already spoken a little bit about that and about our reasoning behind the way we approach that in terms of safeguarding. I've also spoken about risk assessing, asking what a young person needs from those one-to-one conversations. Do they even want them at all? Some of my young women have been very clear that actually, I normally see you in school, I want to keep our relationship in school. You can call like maybe every couple of weeks or send me a text just to check in, but I would rather keep that relationship in that particular context of where I'm used to engaging with you. And that's fine. And as long as I'm kind of confident that then there isn't significant risk in the home, and as long as other professionals are able to check in, or we have some way of checking in with that young person just to make sure they're okay, I don't need to be pushing kind of long phone conversations trying to engage them in the way that I normally would outside of lockdown. And then in terms of the actual conversations, I think some of the things that we've found really helpful as a team at Abianda is just reflecting on some of the things it's helpful to ask young people while we are having those one-to-one conversations, because it's actually really difficult, even if you're on video call, it's quite difficult to pick up body language, to pick up those kind of vibes from a young person, I guess, about whether the session is going well for them and whether they're a bit bored, whether they there's something else that they want to talk about that you're just not hitting on. So some of the questions we found it helpful to ask is, do you want to end the conversation here? Are you okay to carry on to the next activity or topic of conversation that I had planned? Giving the young person to end the session early if it is feeling too much, or if that you notice that they're struggling to concentrate, and just checking in at regular intervals to see how they're doing through that conversation. I also think it's a really good idea to have an agreed time that you're going to stick to, so you've agreed that with the young person and you're not going over it, so you're not kind of pushing their attention span too much. And then finally, in terms of one-to-one conversations, grounding exercises I think are especially important at this time as well, because if we are having difficult conversations over the phone, I know that I've heard from other practitioners and from our own experiences that there has been an increase in kind of historic disclosures of abuse during this time, as young people and actually adults are at home and have the time to reflect on things and think about things that have happened in their past. So there has been an increased level of disclosures. And so if a young person is speaking about abuse from their past or something that's quite difficult and traumatic, also thinking about murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and the subsequent protests that have been happening after that, all of those things are going to be affecting young people. And so if they are having difficult conversations with you over the phone or over video chat, as I said, because we can't read young people in quite the same way as we can when we're there with them in person, grounding exercises are really, really important, just to bring that young person back to their space, to try and support them to reconnecting with the present rather than being caught up with whatever they've just spoken about. that's a really important aspect of finishing the work and finishing conversation as well. So you can Google grounding exercises. There's loads of different types of ones out there. Some of the ones that I use quite regularly are name 5 things that are green, for example, that you can see around you. Another one is naming 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 things you can taste, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can touch, or some variation of that. And that just helps that young person to come back into the room, back into the kind of present moment. And then creativity, I've mentioned a little bit already today, and this is thinking a little bit about what I've seen as really good practice from other organisations, and thinking more about online spaces in general, and also spaces where groups of young people might be able to engage. So my first point is that social media can be your friend, and I think that's one of the positives that is coming out of this time, is that although social media can be a challenge for a lot of us as youth practitioners sometimes, we see a lot of risk on social media, we have a lot of concerns and worries about those spaces. Actually, we've had to engage with them in a way that maybe we haven't done before. We've had to get to know how to use those spaces, we've had to get to know what it's like to actually be in them, and so I think we're actually in a better position in terms of understanding social media, understanding the risks, and also understanding the opportunities and some of the reasons why young people want to connect in those spaces. I would recommend Google, along with some other organisations, have been delivering some free training on social media and online spaces. It's called the Social Switch Project, and if you Google that, you can access those training sessions. They've put them online in lockdown, so I think they've still got dates that are available, and that just gets you thinking about online spaces. And if you feel like you need a bit of extra kind of support or understanding in that area, then that's a really useful training. One thing that they highlighted that I think is really important is community guidelines. So a lot of organisations have set up Instagram pages, Snapchat accounts, and some of those are youth-led. Our one at Abianda has been set up by young women that work with the organisation, and they are leading on the content of that account. But if you're going to do that, it's really important to have community guidelines which state very clearly what's going to happen if a young person that you don't normally engage with comes and makes a disclosure in your DMs. What happens if there's any kind of hate speech or comments on your page? How are you going to respond to that as an organisation? And if it is youth-led, how are you going to support the young people who are leading on that space as well, if those issues and those things do come up? There's been loads of great things going on. I've seen Instagram lives with different practitioners, or organisations connecting together to share expertise and to provide young people with different topics and different skills-based sessions. There's been kind of features from young people, as I was saying, fitness sessions, challenges to try and deal with some of that boredom and the just, the repetitiveness of life at the moment. Online gaming tournaments. So I volunteer with a charity called XLP, and I know that they've been doing lots around fitness sessions, gaming tournaments, and that's been a really great way of engaging young people online, because actually most of them are in those spaces anyway, even when we're not in lockdown. There's been webinars, podcasts, workshops, and I think the great thing about a lot of what I've seen going on has been the way that the organisations and these sort of events have involved young people and started giving them and sharing with them the skills to be able to do this stuff for themselves. And so I think a lot of young people will be coming out of this time, for the ones where they've had the kind of resources and the stability, I suppose, to engage with other services, with new skills and with new things that they can be doing. And it's a great opportunity to connect with people and organisations around the world as well, around the country, in different places, different locations. And I've heard of organisations kind of connecting with people in America, and allowing young people to hear their experiences and to connect with organisations and what's being done there. And then finally, some really creative things that I've heard of organisations doing as well is just allowing young people to actually record this time. Like, it's a very unique and unusual time in all of our lives, and so helping them to really process it, to record it, and to have something to look back on. So maybe a video time capsule. They might do that through writing or art, like the piece that I showed on the first slide. We're getting towards the end of me chatting now, which I'm sure you're pleased to hear, and then there'll be an opportunity for questions. The last thing that I really wanted to highlight around engaging young people virtually is just how important networks and partnership working is at this time. And I know that there's a session later on this afternoon that Ben is doing around this, but I just wanted to highlight it from my perspective of doing one-to-one work with young people as well. Because as I said at the beginning, every young person's experience is going to be different. Some of them don't want to engage online. For some of them, it will work for a bit, and then they'll have a week where they're not having such a great time, and they're not going to want to do a video call. And so this is where I think drawing on other people working with that young person, other professionals, family members, community members is really, really key, and using that young person's network. It might be that they're choosing to call someone else in that network rather than you, and that's okay because that's working for them at that time. But you can check in with that person just to make sure that you know that the young person is doing okay. I think this is really important around safeguarding as well. So for the young women I work with who don't have phones, who are in family environments where I've been quite concerned about the risk within the family, it's been really important for me to be working with different professionals to get a bigger picture of what actually is going on for them. Safeguarding at this time, I'm sure lots of you appreciate, has not been easy at all, and it's very difficult to get an understanding of the young person's experiences. Even if you can speak to them, often parents and other family members are in the background, and so that can be really hard. But for me, the biggest successes I've seen in escalating any safeguarding concerns have been when I've been working really closely with the network, and when we've been speaking to each other. And one example of this has actually been where I've worked with professionals working with older siblings, maybe with people with siblings over the age of 18, who might not always be invited to professionals meetings because they're out of the home, they're over the age of 18, they're adults now, but actually they can often hold really important and key information for the younger children in the home as well. So that's been something that I found quite helpful during lockdown. And just letting the young people know that you are still there to engage whenever they feel able to. I think I've noticed in the last couple of weeks that engagement has kind of tipped off a little bit. We're in the position, kind of lucky position now, where we're starting to return to some face-to-face work. And so it feels like a good time to be doing that, because I think young people are finding it harder and harder to engage virtually, or only be engaging virtually as time has gone on. But ultimately, if that young person is speaking to other people, if they're getting support from other organisations, as long as they know that you're there to come back to, not overwhelming them with messages, but just giving them that reassurance and that regular contact that they know that you are there for them if they need you. So I just wanted to spend the last few minutes really thinking about the new normal, because as I said, we are now thinking about and starting to return to face-to-face work with PPE and being socially distanced and all that kind of thing. But we're starting now to enter back into some kind of new normal. We're not sure how long it will last, and we're not sure exactly what it's going to look like. But I think this is a really important time for us as organisations to think about what are we going to take from this time of lockdown? What have we learned about the young people we work with, about your organisation or you individually? What aspects of engagement from this time do we want to take with us into the new normal? How much of this virtual engagement do we want to continue delivering, and how will that work alongside face-to-face contact? I don't think it's an either or. I think that both can work really well together. And how might we be able to adapt as we go back to this time? Also, planning for the fallout. I think I've heard from numerous professionals that there's a very real sense that when we get out of lockdown, when we start seeing young people face to face again, there's going to be an increase in safeguarding disclosures, there's going to be an increase in concerns, and there's going to be things either that have happened during lockdown that are going to emerge, or as I was saying before, maybe some past experiences that young people have been able to reflect on and are now ready to disclose. So really preparing for that, and preparing to support young people around their mental health and the cumulative trauma. We're going to speak more about this in the next seminar that I'm doing with Abby and Talia, but really considering the impact of this time of loss of potentially people close to young people, loss through COVID, through the virus itself, loss of opportunity to engage with services, loss of time, loss of what this time normally would have offered to them, time to celebrate ending school maybe, or finishing exams, and also the cumulative trauma, particularly for Black and minority ethnic groups, and Black people in particular, where they've been disproportionately affected by COVID, and then we've had the murders in America and the Black Lives Matter movement kind of resurging at this time, and just thinking about the cumulative trauma that is going to have, and the impact that's going to have on young people, and how we are going to be supporting them coming out of that. And that's a big conversation, but I think it's really important to mention. And finally, how are we going to involve young people in shaping that new normal? So a big part of our work at Abianda is participation and kind of giving young people the opportunities to shape services and shape the work that we deliver. So how can we support young people to actually say, this is what the new normal needs to look like? And the little quote that has been flashing on the left hand side of your screen, I think is a good summary of why that's really important. So that is the end of my talking, and we've now got some time for Q&A. So I'm going to come out of screen sharing, I think, for this. There we go.
Hello, thank you so much, Laura. That was great. So, if there are any questions, please put them in the Q&A. I've got a couple of questions. So one of the POW talks we did, we spoke to a bunch of youth workers, and one of them basically said that the conversation between the young people and them as a youth worker was problematic online, mainly because of the lack of human interaction. So if we're doing something over the internet and there's a glitch and there's a delay, that actually plays into a bit of nervousness, frustration. The youth worker I was talking to was very much like, man, I didn't hear you. There might have been a glitch. I just wonder if that's your experience as well, and how you kind of get around that, if you've been able to.
Yeah, I think that's actually been one of the positives of engaging with young people over the phone rather than video call. At the beginning, I was like, this is going to be awful. I want to see their faces. It's not going to work over the phone. And I think in an ideal world, we'd have access to both. We'd be doing both. But in our context, that just doesn't work safely. But I think that phone calls have really helped with that, actually. And my personal experience of lockdown is that I hate Zoom. I don't want to be on Zoom anymore. I mean, I'm very happy to be here, but speaking to people, family members, doing meetings, social events over Zoom, I'm done. And like you say, it's all of those technical glitches and just not being able to get your point across. To the point where I've even had to say to my mum, like, you can't video call me. If you're going to speak to me, you have to call me on the phone, because that's the only way that, like, that is a way that you can support me in lockdown, because those conversations are so much easier. I don't think I read it out, but I think on one of the slides I did talk about writing letters and cards as well. And I think that is, it seems old-fashioned and it's not virtual, but actually some of my most effective work in engaging young people who are finding it particularly difficult to engage has been when I've written them a letter, and they've been like, oh, people don't do this, this isn't like normal. Maybe I should find out who this person is, why they would write me a letter, and why they're thinking of me in this way, to actually put pen to paper.
You got Natalie said, agree more. Actually asked some colleagues, can we actually use a phone call rather than a Zoom? And Gail has also said a lot of writing is distinguished. Love it. Another question I've got, since everyone's been a bit shy, you just answered all their questions, though, that's probably what it is. But you obviously mentioned Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, and we would have heard multiple views on just how this has impacted the world, Black and brown people, you know, views from white people as well. Just personally, from your engagement with young people, what has the sense been with this kind of monumental moment, which feels like, for the first time in my lifetime anyway, the whole world is talking about racism, structural racism, systemic racism, covert, overt racism, whatever you want to call it. Just from your perspective, how's the young people you've engaged with, kind of how they feeling around this issue?
I mean, I think it's had a really huge impact on young people as well. And I think giving them the spaces to reflect on that and talk about it is really important, and upskilling ourselves as practitioners to do that. Like, I am very aware of my identity as a white middle class woman doing youth work in inner city London, and I have to question the power dynamics in that all the time in the way that I deliver work, and this time has highlighted that again for me, and the need to do that continually. And it's a conversation we're having pretty deeply as an organisation as well. So I think, yeah, it's having a really big impact, but it's also highlighting that I think sometimes there's a temptation to think that it's all going to be all right with the younger generation. Like, there's no racism with the younger generation. They're kind of outgrowing that. Everyone's now more enlightened. And I would say from my experience, particularly in the area that I work in, a lot of my young women are white and don't meet the stereotype, which is a massive inaccurate stereotype of the ethnicity of young people that are affected by gangs and youth violence. And for them, actually, racism is still very deep rooted in their conscious and subconscious, because of parents' views, because of the way the parents have grown up. It looks a bit different and it presents a bit differently, but actually I think supporting the young people who are directly affected by this, referring them and signposting them to services who are best placed to give them that support, while also creating the conversations in your own practice, but also learning how to do the education piece, and how you can effectively challenge young people while still supporting them. And I think that's quite a difficult role to play. For me, I'm an advocate
There was pause.
and when their voices are problematic involve racism, actually to challenge that, I have to think really carefully about how I do that in a way where I'm still supporting them, but I'm also actively kind of supporting them to exist in this world, and in the world that we're currently in.
Again, really helpful. There's just a comment from Patrick: have we underestimated the impact Black Lives Matter is having on white British boys with black people? I mean, what I will say, I'll let you answer that, but definitely in my experience, I've experienced this with Stephen Lawrence's murder in 1993 when I was at school at the time, and literally overnight, my black and white friends just divided. And it wasn't even like we had a problem with each other, but you know, one day we're playing football with one another, the next day it's become tribal. So I know that can happen when issues of race become very mainstream, very public. It's in the media. I don't know if that's anything you've experienced yourself or with your young people, Laura.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I can't really speak authoritatively on working with young men, because I don't. In pre-lockdown, I did volunteering in a youth club context where I was engaging with all genders of young people, but that hasn't been able, or I haven't been able to continue as a volunteer during lockdown, so I don't currently have that experience. But I think what you said, Ben, is right, and I think it's also important to realise that actually young people aren't in school together at the moment. So there's going to be a lot of work and a lot of thinking, I think, that needs to go into when all young people are brought back together in a school context in September. Because actually, if those racial divisions are happening, or if there are ideas and concerns from like both sides of the spectrum, I guess, on race at the moment, it's much easier for young people to be only socializing or seeing people who are the same as them, look like them, have the same experiences as them. In September, certainly in a city context, when you bring lots of young people back together, that's maybe something that we need to think about a bit more carefully.
Okay, we've got a couple more comments or questions, and maybe after these two, it might be the last two we can do. But so, Natalie, Laura, I talk to young people about the reality of youth violence, and in particular knife crime. There is true concern about the increase in youth violence as we emerge from lockdown. So I'm being asked to deliver my sessions remotely. The discussion is quite emotional as I share a vivid account of knife crime. What would you recommend, as I am concerned clearly of the environment they may be driving this in, balanced with the need for the talk to be had?
Yeah, and I think there is a real concern that things are going to escalate when we come out of, or as we come out of lockdown, that there's going to be a move to kind of, where there is gang violence, a need to reaffirm territory, and for the same for drug dealing as well. So I think that, yeah, it's important to be having those conversations. I would suggest, there was it's probably a few years ago now, but a report that was put out around the impact of showing videos to young people in the context of schools and assemblies. And it's specifically talking about CSE actually, but the idea that organisations in the past have gone into schools, shown a video that's quite traumatic, very triggering for young people, and there hasn't been a space for follow-up afterwards, and that has a really detrimental effect, even though the aim of doing that is it comes from a positive place. So I think that it would probably be useful to read that, to think about that, and just to think about what support is being offered around that. Is it actually better not to show a film in that context, but to keep it more discussion based? You can do things like getting young people to use third person rather than talking about personal experiences. So they might talk about young people in general, or I think young people's experiences are like this. Anything that you can do to distance the conversation from them slightly, I think in this, okay, sorry, I've just seen your comment, the talk is direct experience. Okay, yeah, so I think, sorry, I misread your original message. Yeah, so in that case, ignore everything I said about films, but if anyone is showing films, then do consider that. If it's direct experience, I think, yeah, trying speaking in a third person, that's how we start all of our work at Abianda actually, is saying to young people, you don't have to speak about your personal experiences, we will speak in the third person. That doesn't mean it's not triggering. And so I think giving young people resources, doing the grounding exercises with them, making sure that you've identified their own strengths and resources that they have to deal with difficult conversations before you get into the conversation, if that makes sense, is probably the best way to approach that. But that's a really difficult one to balance.
Okay, we're running out of time. So Nick has got a question following on from that. What do you think some of the big challenges might be post-lockdown in terms of engaging young people? Are you foreseeing anything in terms of the impact of COVID as a possible generational trauma, as well as significant cultural events like Black Lives Matter, and how young people might experience life?
Yes. It's the simple answer to that. I think that there's so much we don't know, and I know that there's been articles and research that started to come out around the impact on young people's mental health, because adolescence is when people are most likely to develop mental health conditions. So actually we don't know what the impact of isolation and of being disconnected from friends, from that increased freedom that it kind of is what adolescence is all about. We don't know what impact that's going to have yet. So I think I think it's going to emerge over time. So I think it's about us listening really, really carefully to young people as we go, and not assuming in kind of 12 or 18 months time that we're just back to kind of normal youth work, and when we're not still considering and supporting young people to process their experiences and the long-lasting effects. I think it's also really interesting. I've got one young woman who is has been engaging really well virtually actually, and was really struggling with school engagement beforehand. She wasn't really going to school, she wasn't, and it was mainly around bullying. So for her, she's been doing all of her education from home, and she's been really, really enjoying that. She's been like submitting all of her work on time. everything has kind of got better for her, actually, I would say, in lockdown, and she would probably share that experience, certainly in terms of education. So a challenge with that is then thinking, well, how are we going to support her back into normal education in September, and how much do I encourage her to go back to face-to-face sessions with me in order to prepare for that, while also wanting to work with her needs and work with what works best for her. So I think that's going to have to be a conversation where we balance those different needs.
Okay, there is a question from Hannah, but I think just around women and online, I think that might be one we could answer in the next session we're going to do. And James Brown has a question about wondering if you could comment on young people's lack of trust of authority in police and how we can better help them to engage trust power. Laura, can you answer that in 30 seconds?
So at Abianda, we do exercises around human rights and power. And I think the first place to answer that question is to start having those conversations with young people, really hearing their views and finding out what they think. There are other organisations like the Forefront Project. There's lots of other people out there at the moment who are engaging in these conversations in a more activist level. I think connecting young people to those and finding out about those yourselves is important. I think this is going to be it always has been an ongoing struggle, young people and power. It's something to do with their development in some respects, but it's also to do with the way the world works and injustice. But yeah, I think having those conversations and supporting young people to become activists themselves if they want to do that, not to pressure them to do that, but if that is something that they feel is important. Yeah, I don't know if that answers the question, but that's all I've got in 30 seconds.
That's good. So I want to say thank you very much, Laura, for this session. It's been brilliant. Thank you. This will be up on YouTube by this evening, so if you want to send it to people or you didn't catch it, we will be sending all the PowerPoints out from all 8 sessions by the end of next week. The next session is in 15 minutes, so if you have signed up via Eventbrite, you would have got, you should be in your inbox now, a link to the next session, so you can't just stand here. I'm going to end the session in a minute, and you'll see Laura, Ebenezer and Talia in a sec. But yeah, just to say thank you very much. You guys have been it's been great engagement, great questions, and yeah, hopefully we'll see you in the next session. If we don't see you, please, I'll just quickly pull up the other sessions which are coming up so you can see it for yourself. You can see all the other sessions which are coming up, and we've got 2 more today. And just once again, Powered Fight is a charity, so if you do feel like you enjoy this free content and anything that you see on our website, then please consider donating. Thank you very much. Thanks again, Laura. We'll see you in a moment again. I'm going to end this session now. Take care. Bye-bye.